All right, hey everybody. So today we will be going over how to import geometry from Rhino into Revit and actually be able to manipulate that model, whether that be just the materials themselves or actually being able to manipulate the geometry in Revit. So to start off, let's just open our default template. So new. And then template, this should be pretty standard now. Remember, do not open the template, but create a new project from the template. Okay, so now we have our template open. And to be able to import a Rhino model, we need to create one. So open up Rhino. And then doesn't matter what geometry I have units. I have inches right now. You can do feet, and you can do other units, but imperial is the easiest way to go since that's what Revit reads. And all we'll be doing is just creating a really simple geometry. So down under the solids tool, let's do pyramid. Let's do the center. All right. And then let's do there and let's do there. Wait, look, go lay down. All right. Sorry about that. All right, and then we want this to be pretty big because I want to show you how it cuts through the floor. So let's scale this up. Scale, and let's just make this 30 feet tall. 30 feet. All right. Okay. So now we have our model, and what I want to do. There we go. What I want to do is I want to create a material, a custom material for this to go on. So I'm going to double click the existing, call it Rhino layer. Something stupid. And then associate this geometry to that layer because I want to show you guys how the layers are actually imported into the Revit environment. So to export this geometry, we're going to just select the geometry and go to File, Export Selected. And then just save it in here and save it, I don't know, as pyramid or whatever you want. And then under the drop down, so you can do a couple different file types. Personally, I have found that AutoCAD drawings work the best and import the best into the Revit environment. You can do Rhino models now. You can do ACIS solid models. I mean, you could do a bunch of different ones. But I find that the AutoCAD drawing file type works the best. So click that and then click save, and then it's gonna come up with these export options. I find that when you're exporting solid geometry, it always works best if you select 2007 solids or whatever it comes up with. You can play around with default, and if you do import your geometry and it's not importing correctly, this is a good place to start checking both the drawing, the DWG options, as well as the different file types you can use. But for right now, I'm going to do solids and then hit OK. Pretty simple geometry, so it does it pretty quick. And then go back to our Revit environment, and then let's go to level 1. Oops, level 1. And then we'll go up into the Insert tab. So under Insert, you have a bunch of different options. And for CAD files and your geometry, your 3D models, you have two options. One is to import the CAD. That imports it directly into the file. It's a one-time import. And if you want to import another file, or if you want to update that file, you're going to have to re-import it every time. The other way you can do import the geometry is linking it. So linking CAD, and you can link other Revit models as well as topography, whatnot. Linking something within a Revit file allows you to, it creates a tie, a live link back to the file within the computer. So all you have to do to update that file is go into the Manage Links tab, which I'll show in a bit, and just reload it. And whatever changes or updates that you've made come in immediately. You don't have to replace it. You don't have to locate it in your model anywhere. It's already loaded. So that's what we'll do right now. We'll link the CAD, go to Pyramid, and then underneath the import, there is a bunch of different options. So the drop down, these are the different file types that it reads. Now you can do other different files, but these are the main four. And then, oops. And then there's a couple other options. So colors. So if you have a specific color in your AutoCAD file or whatnot, you can preserve the colors. You can invert them for whatever reason, or you can do black and white. So if you have like a CAD drawing you want to bring in and you want to bring it in black and white, you can do it that way. I preserve it. Always have all the layers and levels. Auto detect. So you can do meters and the metric system, but if you do auto detect and you have Imperial, it should come in. And then the two other big options over here are the positioning. So if you do the drop down, there's a couple automatic ones. Automatic center to center. So it'll automatically take your file's center, the geometry center, and place it at the center of the model, the Revit model that you're opening it into. Auto origin to origin. So in your Rhino model, you have your origin, which is that intersection of the Y and X axis. And in your Revit model, you do have an origin. I can show that to you in a second. But I find the best way, especially when you have big models, or if for some reason you've accidentally modeled your Rhino model way off, away from the origin, always do manual center. That way it'll automatically detect the center of the geometry you're importing and let you place it manually. Always orient to view, and then on the left, this is the last selection that you have. It's current view only. So let's say you wanted to import a CAD file that Rayla, go lay down. I know, I'm sorry. You only wanted to import into level 1. You can select this guy, and it will only import into that specific view. It will not show up in any other views. So if you don't want that to happen, make sure that is unchecked. All right. So we got all that selected. Oh, and obviously you can select different placements. But since we're in the level 1 view, it's automatically going to do level 1. All right. So hit open and place. All right. So we've linked this model. And if we go to a 3D view, we can see geometry has come in. And there's not much you really can do under the Properties tab. You can offset it from the base plane that you've set it at. So you can change the height of it, essentially, the elevation. And you can also manage the materials. So the way CAD imports work is they import all the layer data into the file. And to be able to manage those layers and manage the styles associated with it, if you go to the Manage tab at the top and then go to Object Styles, it'll come up with your typical Revit elements. And on the far right, it's under Imported Objects. So our pyramid drawing has come in, and our Rhino layer that we created before is now populated under here. And we can change a couple different things. Can't change the cut pattern, but we can change the line projection weight, so the line weights. We can change the line color, and we can also change the line pattern. So let's say we wanted to do a dash line or a center line, we can do that as well. And then the last thing we can change is the material. So I'll get into materials a little bit later. I want to show you a couple other ways to import it and to use that geometry to create editable geometry. So if we press OK, you can see that our file has changed now to orange. And then if we turn off TL, you can see the line weights came in as well. Okay, So the one thing with this, oh, and I forgot to mention, so we've linked this CAD file. All right, so it is linked to pyramid.dwg, and to be able to relink it, let's say we change something, we can go to Insert, Manage Links. You can also find this under the Manage tab on the right, Manage Links. Hit that, and then the first page is all of your Revit links. We don't have any, so we'll go over to CAD. Our pyramid is in there. And then down here we have an unload. So say you want to remove it, you can unload it. We reload it, so that reloads it from the same exact file location on your computer as the last one. And if you move this file, it will lose its link and you'll have to reload it. And you can reload from, find that file again, click open, and it will reload it. Okay? So the one thing with importing geometry from or directly into the Revit project is that it doesn't cut. So we're in level 1 right now, and it should be cutting through the pyramid 4 feet above the finished floor. If we go to elevation, we can see 4 feet should be about right here, and it should be giving us a cutout. But for some reason, Revit doesn't like to do that. And so the way we have to, if in case you want to do a plan or you want to do a section, actually show it cutting through the imported geometry, is we need to import it into a family. It's a little bit more in depth and a couple more steps, but let's just do that right now. So File, New, Family, and then go to just a generic model. Press Open. And then it's the same process of importing into a family. Import CAD is the only thing you can do. You can outlink CAD. So select Pyramid, Manual Center, press Open. Remember, our pyramid's pretty big. So let us save this as Pyramid Family. And then we can load this back into the project. So now we're in level 1, and now it's actually cutting through the geometry. And we can still manipulate the line weights, the line color, and the material. It's a little bit slightly more buried, not as buried as some things. But if you go back to your object styles under the Manage tab, object styles, under imported objects. So instead of being its own file, it's going to be under this imports in families. And the one sucky thing about this is if you have a lot of families and a lot of imports in families, let's say you have a huge file that you're working on, every single layer in all of those families are going to show up under this. And you have to really you got to remember what you named your layer to be able to find it, whereas this automatically just has it under the pyramid drawing. All right, same thing. Let's change this color to blue so we can distinguish it, and then let's make it a dash line. Okay, press all right. All right, so now we have all our stuff. Now, if we wanted this to be pochade, what we could do, since this is technically a generic model, is if we go into the visibility graphics and go down to generic models and do a cut pattern as green. Press OK. That's how we associate the cut. So that's how we get poche. We can do line work or line weights around the cut, etc. All right. So those are two different ways to import CAD or your Rhino files directly into Revit. But the one thing with these imports is you cannot manipulate them. What is done in Rhino is done, and you cannot manipulate any further. That's why linking the file is really beneficial because you can continuously update the Rhino model and relink it as you go to update the geometry that's in Revit. However, there is a way to import Rhino geometry into Revit and be able to manipulate it, and that's through the conceptual massing environment. So if we go up to Massing and Site and go to In Place Mass, same process, go to Insert, Import CAD. You can also link CAD, but since we're breaking anyway, it won't matter. Press OK. And then up at the top, so you have Create Form, and then you have this Explode. So Explode, if you try to explode the two basic imports, that's just going to explode it to its line work, and it won't work. It'll give you an error message. If you explode it within the conceptual massing environment, if the geometry is simple enough, and I say that very, very purposefully, because if the geometry is too complex, it may not work. But since we have a pretty simple geometry, if we hit explode, it turns it into a conceptual mass. And we can manipulate, and we should be able to manipulate, well, I guess not. There we go. So we can manipulate the geometry that way. It doesn't have as many manipulation points, like you don't get the point, and you can't really take a surface, but if you highlight everything, it'll show you all the different manipulation points that you can do. Okay? And you can also, the one thing with this, is you can also divide the surface. So let's say we wanted to do a crazy pattern on here, and you can do that. Alright? Okay, so that is importing Rhino geometry into the Revit environment. It is, it does have its restrictions. Like I said, if the geometry is too complex, if the double curvature, if you have double curvature, is too complex, if there are too many faces, and it's a really large file, sometimes it can error out. It all depends. So if you do run into issues, check the file type that you're exporting. Check the options that you have with each file type. That's like the default versus the AutoCAD solids, etc. And then check how you're importing it into the file. Some things are just too complex for Rhino or Revit to handle, which is unfortunate, and which is why I highly encourage you guys to try and model your massing. If you do plan on using Revit as your primary tool, model the massing in the conceptual massing environment. All right, so we're done with this conceptual mass, so we can just finish mass, and let's get into materials. So we've covered it a little bit so far, but if we go into manage, on the far left there's a materials tab. Click that, and that brings brings up all the materials that are currently loaded within the project. There's a lot of different ones, and let's do like cabinet handles. And in each material, there's identity, which never really, unless you're a manufacturer, you don't typically need to put anything of that in here. But the two primary tabs you'll use are graphics and appearance. So graphics are all of your technical or graphic styles, like shading, like hatches, that kind of stuff. If you're doing a drawing and you want to show a concrete texture cutting through a concrete material, you can associate that here. If you're in the shaded view, so right now we're in wireframe. Go lay down. Sorry. Lay down. If let's say you just wanted like a crosshatch, you can do that here. Those will show up in your wireframe and your shaded view viewports, view styles, graphic styles. But your appearance, what you do for your renderings, all come from the appearance tab. That's where you can do texture maps. That's where you can do bitmaps. You can do cutouts. You can do transparencies. You can do a significant amount of manipulation of the material to get it to look right. And personally, so I'll show you in a little bit, but like you can see here, some materials have specific settings associated with them. Like, so metals have this specific metal tab, and you can choose different metals and finishes associated with them, and you can do a couple things. And let's say we go to wood, so this cherry. You can do a wood texture, you can do the stain color, all that kind of stuff. That's fine, but I find when I'm doing my materials, I need to get really specific and really prescriptive with how I manipulate those materials. And so there's a default material I'll show you in a sec that has a lot more settings that you can edit and choose from. So on the bottom here, there's that little plus sign. Hit create new material. It's going to create a default new material. If you right click, you can rename it. So we'll call this Rhino material 1. Okay, and then under graphics, so let's change a couple things. I typically like to use the render appearance just because it helps me identify what materials I've actually edited and making sure that the materials, the appearance look right. And then let's do surface pattern. Let's click this. So under here you have drafting and model patterns. Model patterns are going to be scaled to the exact dimensions of the model. So if I do a 4-inch tile pattern, in every single drawing, it's going to be 4 inches. If you do a drafting, that scales to the scale of the drawing, right? So the scale of this concrete hatch is going to change depending on if I am doing a 1/8 inch equals a foot drawing versus a 1.5 inch equals a foot drawing. It's going to change in scale depending on the scale of the drawing. So for right now, let's just do a model material. Let's just do, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. Just do a material, or a pattern, excuse me. And then the color down here, remember, anytime you're doing a pattern, the color that's associated with it is going to change the color of the lines. It's not going to change the overall shading of the pattern. And then I just looked this up today. This is a relatively new feature for Revit, I believe. It's definitely new in 20. It may have been in 19. You can do 2 different patterns. And you can do, so let's say I wanted to do a tile and a concrete. You can do that. And then cut pattern, like I said before, if I had a concrete material, I can do a concrete hatch. So anytime I cut that concrete, it gives me the concrete hatch associated with it. And then patterns. And then appearance. So this is where we get real specific. So I created a new file, and that gives me the default settings for all of my appearance. And like I said, it's different from like metal materials, wood materials, glass materials. It can go real specific. All right, and I like to have these just so I have the option of manipulating them. Let's say, I wanted this material to glow. I can have it self-illuminate. I can change the temperature of the light, how bright it is, and the color of that light. I can do cutouts, transparency, etc. Now, let's say you did want to bring in a wood material or a glass material, whatever. There are a library of materials, preset materials that you can bring in. And to do that, you go to replace this asset. If you click that, that brings up the asset browser. It has all those preloaded guys in there. And it has a lot. Okay. So I typically like to search. So let's say I wanted to do glass. It has all the different types of glass that you can do. They all have presets, etc. You can do concrete, you can do wood, all that good stuff. But I like to stick into the default for right now, unless I'm going really quick. And there's a certain couple things. So generic. So right now we don't have a texture map or an image inserted in here, so it's going to default to the color up here. So if we made this a lighter gray, that material is going to render light gray. Glossiness, that's pretty self-explanatory. Reflectivity, you can change the direct reflections and the oblique reflections. Transparency, etc. Translucency, you can change different refractions, which is pretty cool. Cutouts, etc. All those you can play around with. I'm gonna go over a couple, and they'll cover the basics of what the manipulations are. So the first is an image, and I want to do a stainless steel. And so I can go in to this drop down at the right. Oops, just kidding. Just click into it, and then it's going to bring me to a browser. And I wonder if it's in here. I can never remember. So there are materials that come in with guess not. There are material library that you can find on your own. I know where mine is. I have a link to it. Just in case it loses its link, I can find it pretty easily. But a lot of times you're going to have a custom texture that's not going to have a preloaded material in there. So next best thing, Google. So I typed in steel texture seamless. That's pretty standard. You'll always want a seamless texture, so make sure that the texture is consistent across the entire face of the geometry. And then I found this one down. Found this one down at the bottom. It's pretty flat. It's got a nice texture. It's seamless. So let's save this image to a place on your computer that you can find. Why am I having a brain fart right now? Documents. Okay. All right, and then the other thing I want to find while I'm here is dots. And you'll find out why in a second. So let's just get a dots pattern. All right. We can minimize this. So let's bring in that stainless or that steel image. Click that guy. Click your seamless texture. Hit open. Now that image is going to be projected onto our material. However, sometimes the scale you'll want to change, you'll want to manipulate. Maybe you'll want to rotate it a little bit. So if you click into the image, it'll bring up an editing window, and it'll give you the scale of that geometry and different manipulations of it. So you can have it tile, or you can have it just be one singular image in case you want to bring in like a graphic or something like that. You can move it in the field. And then you can also change the size. So if we want to change it to a 3 feet large texture, we can do that. I don't think I explained. All right. So for those of you who don't know what a texture map is, it's essentially where you take a texture of a material, typically a square or a rectilinear geometry, and you essentially copy and paste it across the entire face of a geometry to mimic the material and the aesthetic of the material that you're trying to represent. So this thing is going to be copy and pasted across the entire thing. That's why we want a seamless texture. so that when it goes from the first image to the second image, it looks like a continuous material. Alright, when we're done with that, hit done. We can fade this material on the geometry if we want, and then we'll want that material to be a little bit reflective. You can change that depending on how it turns out. Let's not have transparency turned on. And then the other area that I want to show you is the cutouts or the bump. So the other thing that you can do with materials within modeling software are bitmaps. So what bitmaps are, it's a little bit different from a material texture where it reads like black and white essentially, and a grayscale, and you can have it do different transformations of a material based on the pattern, the black and white pattern of the bitmap that you are importing. So we downloaded that black and white image of the dots. So that is how we can create a perforated panel, because we can essentially tell Revit that we want the see, that's where it's gonna suck. Let's get a nicer material, one that doesn't have a black bar on the bottom of it. To re-import an image, just go back to the source and click on the name. Go back to the white dots. There we go. Alright, that's nice. And then you have the same editing tools as you already have. You can invert the image. So let's say we wanted to have like little white dots of the metal and not cutouts. You can invert it to get that. And then let's hit done. So now if we make this a little bit bigger, the preview, you can see that there are cutouts. There's little holes. That every black dot, it's telling it to cut a hole in the material. Alright, so that's our first material. Let's duplicate this guy. Do Rhino 2. And then one thing to remember when you're duplicating a material, the appearance asset, so generic 8, doesn't change. So let's say we went in and manipulated these materials, it's going to manipulate the same appearance material in Rhino Material 1. So what we got to do is on the far right, there's a little duplicate. Just click that. Creates a new material completely separate from the first one, and we can edit this however we want. So let's remove this image. Let's do an orange material. Yeah, let's do a light one. Let's do a little gray. Yeah. Alright, and then let's play with, instead of reflectivity and cutouts, let's do bumps. So bump is the same idea as the cutouts, where it uses a bitmap to do certain transformations. So if we look, now there's little dimples, little insets in the material, and we can increase the amount by increasing or decreasing the amount tab. And you do have a negative, so if you want, those were indents before, if you want actual bumps, you can invert it. So a nice nifty tool to have. Bitmaps and texture maps are really good for when you have a really complex geometry, like a perforated panel, or like a corrugated metal, let's say. But you don't want to model all of the little perforations or all of the corrugations. This is how you do it really quickly. It's really easy for the computer to do this in the rendering software, and it keeps your file a lot lighter. Alright, so that's our second material. And then our third material, let's play with the transparency a little bit. Remember, we have to duplicate this guy. Let's get rid of bump. Let's do transparency. Let's do 50%. Let's turn reflectivity back on, and let's change it to blue. Okay. Alright, and then in the graphics, render appearance, we can keep all those the same. It's not going to matter. Alright, so now we have 3 new materials. Show you how to associate them. So for the first one, this is the linked file. This is the imported file in the family, and this is obviously our conceptual mess. So to manipulate each individual CAD file's materials, go to the object styles under manage, and go to imported objects. And now let's change the Rhino layer from this weird render material to Rhino material 1. Let's change this one to Rhino material 2. And then let's go in and change this material to Rhino material 3. Alright, so right now you can't really see anything because we're still in the wireframe, or excuse me, hidden line mode. If we go to shaded, we can start to see the different shades of color for each material. And if we go to realistic, we can then see the actual textures. If we zoom in real close, we can see the cutouts, the bumps, etc. Okay. Alright, so this is good for right now. But where it really comes into play is when you go to render. So to render from Revit itself, it's under the View tab. You can do a in-place render. You can come up with here, just do a quick render. It's going to render your view at the moment, and it's not very pretty, as you can see. You can do render in cloud, and that gives you a little bit nicer of a render, and it has a little bit more settings. But I have found that the quickest way to get renders out, the quickest way to be able to see your model, see your design in real time, and be able to reference and be able to justify the decisions that you're making in real time is through a live rendering software. Enscape is one of those. Lumion is another. There's another one called Twinmotion, which is currently free, but it's a little bit more involved. There's a lot more you have to do to install it and to use it, but it is free. And then Lumion and Enscape both have student versions that you can download. I've asked you to download Enscape, and that's what I'm going to use right now. Oh, one thing before I forget. So I'm going to use the mass as an example, and we have to edit the mass. We will manipulate. So I went in and I changed the entire material of the mass to the material 3. There is an option to paint something. So like in SketchUp, you can paint the different materials on there. That is the same idea in Revit. So under the geometry tab right here is this little paint tool. If you click that, it'll populate all the different materials in your project. You can click it, and then it will allow you to paint individual surfaces with those materials. Alright, it's just a good tool to know how to use. Hit done. Now you have individual surfaces painted with each material. And if you hit the little drop down right next to it, there's a remove paint button. In case you don't like it, you can remove it. I'm going to keep those on there just to show you how that looks. Okay, hit finish mask. So, Enscape. Let me see. Yep, save your project. Let me see how I'm doing on time. 40 minutes, that's not bad. Okay, so Enscape. Let me, hold on 1 second. Let me check to make sure I hit all of my notes. Oh, yep, okay. So, Enscape, it is up at the top under your tabs. This is the Enscape tab. So at the far left, I'll go through it, is your start. This is how you start the render machine, the render engine. You can select any 3D view within the project. Right now we only have 3D, so that's the only one populating. But if you set up specific views, you can have those created here. If you have a VR headset, you can enable that. It'll do the dual eye view. And then once we have the machine started, it'll take all these gray buttons and make them live. But you have your render. So that's how you render an actual specific image, still image. Export is if you want to export a standalone file that's separate from Revit. That you can do that, and that doesn't require you to be able to log into Revit. However, you can't edit anything within that export. It's standalone. Create view. So let's say we have a perfect shot that we've set up in Enscape, and we want to save that shot. You'll hit create view, and you'll name it, and it will populate within your 3D views. And then asset library. So this is a new one. It's new within the last like 6 months. And it has all different types of people, trees, accessories, all your different types of entourage that you can want is in here. I don't know if this is in the student version, so if it's not, I apologize. But this is what you get if you pay for it. So there's almost 1,500 different accessories, and you can choose different people that all render nicely. So people, vegetation, etc. X out of that. So these are your video editors. If you wanted to create a panorama, you can upload stuff to browsers. So you can actually like do a couple renders, do a couple panoramas, and actually have it associated with a web browser. So you can send someone a link, they can open it up and look around the file. It's really good for clients to be able to just email them a link of the rendering and have them paint around it. Never have used sounds. And then general settings. So general settings, all your preferences, if you want to slow down your mouse speed or your key speed, etc., etc. Big thing right here, your visual settings. And we'll get into this once we open and start the engine. But this has all of your different graphic manipulations. So rendering, so different outlines, different modes that you can do, quality of renders. You can do the background, so different saturation, temperature. You can do like different environmental conditions, horizon line, clouds, etc. And then change the resolution of the output renderings, the still renderings that you do, and the file types, etc. Okay, so without further ado, let's start this bad boy up. So they have different tutorials that you can take if you want to get a little bit more in depth. But they have this control bar down here that has all of your different tools. So think of Enscape as a video game almost, where you have arrow keys to move yourself around. That's your ASDW. You can do up and down. So let me. So you can go up and down. You can do forward, backward, right, left. And then you can move faster by either holding down the shift key, the control key, or do both. And you can really speed up. That's in case you have really big files that you got to pan around really quick. And then to orbit, so to look around, you hold down the left mouse button and pan. To orbit, you hold the right click button. So wherever you click, that's where you're going to orbit from. So I clicked on that last pyramid over there. That's how I'm going to orbit. This can get a little bit confusing. I typically just fly around. And then you can actually have a map. So if you do M up at the top left, it takes the geometry and it actually cuts it wherever your elevation is, and then shows that that geometry in relation to where your mouse is. Okay, pretty cool. I think that's it. Yeah, so we may get into video editing, but I want to show you the different tools. So to hide this little thing, hit H. Oh, that was the last thing. Sorry. So in Enscape, it's a realistic rendering software. So you have control of the sun and of lighting. And if you want to change the time of day, what you do is you hold down Shift and then hold down the right mouse button and pan either to the left or the right, and it will, in the bottom right corner, you can see the time of day and where the sun is setting or rising. Alright, those are kind of the basics. What I'm going to do now, show you the live editing capability of it. So up here at the top, you can pause the live updates in case you have a bunch of work that you want to do and you don't want it continuously updating. You can pause it. But since we don't really have a lot to do, what I want to do is just create a floor. I'll show you the walk around mode. So let's just create a floor really quick around these guys. Doesn't matter what kind. And then it's, well, typically it'll give you a think button, but since it doesn't, since it's a pretty basic file, it doesn't really take that much time. So we're flying around right now, but if you hit space, it drops you down and gravity is engaged. And then it floats you basically above the ground plane by eye level. And you can actually change the eye level. I believe it's set at around 5'6", 5'4", to give the average person's eye line. And then you can walk around. Of course, you can't float anywhere. You can't fly up, but you can walk around. It's good for videos. So you can see our bumps are right there. Our transparency. Oh, when you're in walking mode, you can actually climb things or run into different objects. If you're in fly mode, so let's hit space again, you just move through objects. Okay. So walk, you either bump into or run up. Fly, you go through. Alright. So, obviously, we just have some random pyramids with some random materials, so it doesn't look too great. And then I wanted to point out, right now we just brought in a basic concrete floor. This is what a bad texture map looks like. If you look at our stainless, or our, I keep saying stainless. If you look at our steel texture, that seamless texture, it reads as one flat texture over there. Because this is not a seamless texture, you can really read the repetitive nature of the texture map. That is no bueno, because that never happens unless you have a tile that looks exactly the same. That doesn't happen in real life. Okay? So I'm going to show you a couple of the modes that you can do, manipulate. So if we go back to our Revit file, go under Enscape tab, and then bring up the visual settings. We can go back to this, and then bring back our visual settings. Why can't I? Well, that sucks. Usually you're able to have this open as you have this open, but I guess you can't. So I'll go through this really quick, step by step. So outlines. So if you have no outlines, then all of your edges are just going to show the shade, the different shades. So if you look at the edge of the pyramid, you can just tell where it is based on the two tones of shading. But if we turn on the outlines, turn that bad boy up, go back. Now it actually gives you an outline around each edge. Okay? That's good if you have some reveals that aren't showing up, or objects that may not have an edge. I don't like to turn it on too much because then it looks pretty cartoonish, but that may be the aesthetic you're looking for, or if you just want edges to show up a little bit brighter. Okay? Mode. So mode is pretty interesting. So none is your typical materials. These are your rendering materials that come in straight from Revit. If we go to white mode, it essentially goes to white. Transparency and your bitmaps are the only thing that come through. But the color and the texture all go to flat white. So this is pretty good when you're just doing your initial moves and you want to see that the spatial quality or the aesthetic from the outside, the sculptural quality of your designs are matching what you're envisioning. This is a really good method of producing some pretty quick studies without having to dive too much into the different materials. And then there's a couple other ones. Polystyrol, it essentially just looks like a foam model. It's pretty close to the white model. And then light mode or light view. If you want to do some quick, and I mean quick, daylighting studies, you can do this. It's not very accurate. This always changes, so you can't actually set any parameters. It changes based on whatever light readings it's getting within the view itself, and you can't change the values. So it's good and bad, but you can use it as some pretty quick diagrams in case daylighting is a big part of your design. Let's move this back to none. And then, of course, there's some camera settings that you can change. You can change the field of view in case you're not getting what you want. Rendering quality, pretty self-explanatory. 2-point perspective. So this is your true camera 2-point perspective. Of course, we don't have any vertical surfaces, so we can't tell. But right now, if we had any vertical lines, they would be perfectly vertical. And that's why if we go too high up, it becomes almost impossible to look down, because 2-point perspective requires all vertical lines to be vertical. So you can't look straight down at something and maintain vertical lines vertical. So it warps it. If you uncheck this, then it becomes a little bit more realistic, where you can look down at something or up at something. It becomes a true perspective. So that's just something to think of when you're doing your renderings. Personally, we always, unless it is absolutely impossible, always use 2-point perspective. It is the standard for professional practice. Image. So these are just different kind of things that you can change. Saturation, whatever. Bang, bang, bang. Ooh, we got a nice vignette with a little bit of fisheye, lens flare. You can get pretty prescriptive with it. I was looking for defaults. Let's just reset this to default. Oh, it resets everything. I apologize. Just be careful with that. I think that was it. Yeah, 2-point perspective. And then atmosphere. So this is a big one. So right now our atmosphere is a bunch of these funky clouds, a solid horizon line, and we can start to change that. So instead of a sky background, we can do a white one. So this is good in case you have a lot of massing studies or diagrams that you want to do. You can change fog. I absolutely hate fog. It just makes your rendering look blurry. I don't really know why anyone would introduce fog unless you have a project in San Francisco, but whatever. Brightness, whatnot. So this is your horizon line. You can make white as well. Like I said, really good for diagrams. And then you can also do different backgrounds. So let's say we want to do a mountain background. Oops. And we uncheck white background. Now we got mountains. Ooh, fancy. And then we can actually rotate these mountains. Of course, you can't tell, but rotating these are essentially taking the image and rotating them around. So let's say, well, I guess mountain range isn't the best example, but if we do, I know, construction site. Let's say we didn't want this crane in the background. We could rotate it around. Now we don't have that crane in the background. Of course, we have that one, but that's how you do that. Clouds. I typically never like clouds. I like having these luminous faded ones or striations. Personally, I think clouds are a little cheesy. They always look a little fake. They're never as regular as they are in renderings. They're very randomized, and personally, I just don't think that those ever translate. But this is typically how I like to render. Probably a little bit less, honestly. But yeah. So these are the different settings, and then of course you can change the view and and this is pretty cool. So you can export object idea, material idea, and depth channels. So let's check that. Let's bring this up to like 200. All right, so we have a couple different settings. All right, weird backgrounds. Let's render. So right now, I'll tell you up front, this is pretty much the quality of rendering that you're going to have. So let's do render. Under the Enscape tab, sorry, I'm going a little fast. Under the Enscape tab, under tools, now that we have the engine actually open, we have all these tabs now that we can, or tools that we can use. So hit render. It'll bring you up with a browser of where you want to save it. And then it'll default to essentially the time that it is right now and the date, and the different file types that you can save it as. So if you hit, let me save it under our folder and then hit save. So it's going to buffer, and then it's going to save it to that location. So this is our rendering. It is what it is. What that bitmap channel under visual settings, under visual settings, under capture, we check this export object ID, material ID, and depth channel. Those are these guys. So it not only does it like cuts out background and transparencies or any different cutouts or bumps that you have, but it also can identify different materials and different objects. This is important if you want to be able to Photoshop stuff really quickly, right? So let's say we had this background in here and we wanted to put in another background. Let's say we took a photo of our site and we wanted to layer in the actual image of the site within the rendering. We could use this image to just select all the black within the image and basically edit out all this background so that only the objects that we rendered are in the image. Then we can layer ours back in. Same with materials. Let's say for some reason this material and this material didn't render right and you want to manipulate them a little bit, you can use the solid colors that they generate to easily select all and manipulate the materials there. It's a good way if you want to Photoshop instead of having to go in and crop out this entire thing or crop out all of the background. Use those maps to help you. Alright, so that is Enscape. I'll show you a couple other tools. So export, like I said, it's standalone file. You can create view. Oh, so render image, you can actually render the image into the file, so you can render it as a view. You can also create views. So let's say I really like this view of these pyramids. You can create view, Enscape view 1, and now it populates in here. However, it doesn't come in very nicely. It sets up the perspective of the camera so that when you open it here, so if I move around for some reason, I want to get back to that specific perspective, all I got to do is go in, click this again, and it goes back to this position. So that's how you kind of save different cameras around the object. Asset library, let's just place this guy in there. So assets, entourage, they're very good for scale, very good for projects. You always want to be able to validate the scale of the human and the occupant back to the design. So do people, and again, if you don't have this entourage, if that's not in the student version, I apologize. There are things out there that you can download from the internet that are just as good. So now we have Our Lady. Now, she's not as realistic as a picture, but it's pretty good from a little farther back. Let's see. And then videos. So videos are a little more in depth. I'll cover them really quick. So if we do video editor on off, click that. Now we have this guy down here. And how this works is you set up a series of frames, or essentially a series of pictures as you go around, and that creates your video. That creates your camera path that it follows along the video. So let's add keyframe down at the bottom. So it's going to start at this image, and then let's pan around, add another keyframe, and now it's going to populate this camera path. So what it's going to do is it's going to go from this perspective and then gradually change to the perspective of this guy. And then if we, go up here, add a keyframe. See, now it's moving around. Oops. Go around. Add keyframe. And then we can preview it really quick. So it goes from the first frame to the second frame, and then up to the third frame. And it calculates all of this based on a preset time. But if you want to stop it, just hit escape, and then you click one of these. It'll bring up that frame, and you can change actually the time of day, field of view, and then you can also change the timestamp. So if you want it to move a little bit faster, you can change the timestamp, hit apply, and then if we preview this again, moves a little faster. And let's say we want to change this one, change it to time of day. Right back. And I think it should change the time of day from the second to the third. There you go. So you can actually have it showcase the shadows and the different times of day. Okay. So once you have your entire video set up, you have the total duration set up, and you can change the total duration down here. If you just want to make everything move faster, you can do that down here. If you minimize and go to render video, what that's going to do is it's going to ask you a place on your computer to save. And then it's going to go through and render every single still frame within the entire video. Of course, this is not very complicated of a model, so it doesn't take that much time. However, if you do have a really large, complex, material-heavy file, it is going to take a while. It's going to have to render each individual frame over and over and over. So just be aware of that. But once that's done, it'll export as a .mp4, a video file, and you can have cool little videos playing. Okay, I think that about covers it. Honestly, if you want, I want to show. So for your deliverables, let's do a Enscape rendering. And if you couldn't get Enscape to work on your computer, you can do a Revit Render. But please try and do Enscape. It's going to make your life a lot easier. And I'll send out these deliverables over email so you have them. But let's do one Enscape or Revit Render showing all three of the pyramids with the 3 different materials highlighted, and then I'll think of something else. But for right now, that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Email me. We can set up an in-class session. So thanks. Good luck at career fair.